وَإِذْ تَأَذَّنَ رَبُّكُمْ لَئِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ وَلَئِن كَفَرْتُمْ إِنَّ عَذَابِي لَشَدِيدٌ.
Welcome back, everyone. Today we are doing a deep dive into something, well, pretty foundational, I think, to a lot of different ways of thinking about a good life. And that's gratitude.
Right.
Like it really pops up, in so many different places as a key to, kind of contentment.
Absolutely. It's really a cornerstone, I think, in many different, faiths and philosophies and
Right.
just for a good life in general.
Yeah.
And to really kind of get into the nitty-gritty of this, we have a really interesting sermon we're going to look at today. It was delivered in Kuwait back in 2022 by Sheikh Saeed Al-Kamali.
Okay.
And the core of his message really is this idea, this essential practice of thanking God for blessings.
Okay, so thanking God for blessings. And, what I thought was really cool about this particular sermon was the way that he uses a story. It's, this really powerful narrative from the Hadith.
Right.
And it tells the story of, these three people from the children of Israel who are, each facing a pretty significant challenge in their life. So we have someone who's dealing with leprosy, we have somebody who's bald, and then we have someone who's blind.
That's right. And through these, these three very different challenges that they're facing, Sheikh Al-Kamali really draws out, some pretty insightful lessons about how we recognize, how we appreciate, and then ultimately how we respond to the good in our lives.
Right.
Right. So it's kind of, moving from the head to the heart.
Right.
And then into action.
Right. So not just, intellectually understanding something,
Yeah.
but really like letting it impact the way that you live your life.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we're going to be looking at this deep dive. We're going to kind of really unpack this sermon. We're going to try to understand, all of the little nuances of this story, and then, kind of ultimately see what are the key insights for us today.
Yeah. Sounds great.
Okay, so let's get into this story. So it starts out, with God referred to as Allah in the sermon, wanting to test these three individuals.
Great.
And how does this initial test play out?
So the sermon, it describes an angel being sent to each of these men, but appearing in a way they wouldn't, recognize.
Right.
He's appearing in human disguise.
Okay.
And the very first question that this angel poses to each of them is, about their deepest wish, their greatest desire. And for the man with leprosy, his desire is to have healthy skin again.
Okay.
And to no longer face the social rejection that came with his condition.
Yeah. That's a really fundamental human desire, right?
Yeah.
Just to be accepted.
Right, absolutely.
To not be, rejected or looked down on or seen as other.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the leper's, deepest longing. What about the bald man? What was he longing for?
So the bald man, he desired a full head of hair, and that was really to escape the disdain and mockery that he endured because of his baldness.
Yeah.
And then the blind man,
Yeah.
he yearned for his sight to be restored.
Right.
So he could see the world and the people around him.
Right.
And so I think, looking at these three initial desires, it really kind of highlights what they felt like was missing
Right.
most acutely in their lives.
Yeah. And so the angel, acting on behalf of God, he actually, addresses each of these things directly.
Yeah, precisely. So the angel touches each man, and miraculously, they're healed.
Wow.
The leper skin becomes clear and healthy. The bald man's head is covered with, this beautiful hair, and the blind man's vision is restored.
Okay. So that's pretty amazing, right? Like that's
Absolutely.
almost instantaneous kind of transformation.
Yeah.
Okay. But the test isn't over, right? So it then kind of moves into, kind of this realm of material wealth.
Yeah, exactly.
So how does that play out?
So, the angel then asks each of these men, what kind of wealth they desire most.
Okay.
And the man who was once a leper, he asks for camels, specifically a pregnant camel that is 10 months along, called a naka ushra.
Okay, so a naka ushra.
Yeah.
So why is that significant? Why is the pregnant camel, such an important request?
So a pregnant animal, it wasn't just about immediate wealth.
Right.
It represented this potential for that wealth to multiply and to kind of ensure future prosperity.
Got it.
Right. So it kind of shows this this desire for sustained growth and a longer term outlook.
Right. Like an investment, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And similarly, the man who had been bald, he desired cattle.
Okay.
And again, he specifically asked for a pregnant cow.
Okay.
So again, echoing that same desire for increase, for his wealth to grow.
Right. Okay. And then the individual who had, regained his sight, what about him?
So he asked for sheep, specifically a ewe with offspring.
Okay.
Again, focusing on the ability of this wealth to reproduce and expand.
Got it.
And, the sermon really emphasizes that each man was granted exactly what they asked for, along with the blessing for their wealth to grow.
Okay.
And soon they each possessed entire valleys filled with, their respective livestock. So,
Right.
A really kind of vivid picture of God's abundant favor.
Yeah. So we go from these three people, kind of experiencing suffering and hardship to, really, kind of having a life of abundance.
Yeah, abundance.
And you would think that would create a pretty lasting sense of thankfulness.
Right.
Right. But the story doesn't end there, right? There's another test.
Right, there is.
And this is where we see a different side of human nature emerge.
Yes, indeed.
So tell us about this second test.
So after a period of time has passed, the angel returns to each of these men.
Okay.
But this time he appears disguised as a needy traveler who is suffering from the very same conditions that they had once endured.
Wow.
So, quite turn events.
Yeah.
And he approaches the man who was once a leper.
Okay.
Right? Now appearing as a leper himself.
Got it.
And reminds him of his past suffering.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And he asks him for a single camel to help him on his journey.
Okay.
And he invokes the name of the one who had blessed him with good health.
Okay. So that's a pretty direct, appeal, right?
Okay.
Like a direct reminder of where he came from and who helped him.
Exactly.
So how does the former leper respond to this?
So his response is actually surprisingly harsh.
Okay.
And completely lacking in gratitude.
Wow.
He claims that he has many obligations. The sermon actually uses the Arabic word huquaq, which translates to rights and obligations.
Okay, huquaq.
Yeah. So essentially, he's using this excuse of his existing responsibilities to dismiss the angel's request.
Okay.
And he even kind of suggests that the angel is asking for too much.
Right.
Of what God had given him.
Wow.
Right. There's no acknowledgement of his own past plight or the incredible generosity he received.
Right. That's a really stark, contrast, right? To where he was before. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's the angel's response to this?
So to this blatant lack of gratitude, the angel says, "If you are lying, may Allah return you to your previous state."
Wow. Okay. So that's a pretty,
powerful.
Yeah, powerful.
Ominous.
Yeah, ominous statement.
Yeah.
Okay. So now the sermon goes on to tell about the angel's encounter with the man who had been bald.
Right.
And how does that go?
So this is very interesting, right? It's almost an identical interaction.
Really?
Yeah, you have the same disguise, the same appeal based on his past affliction, and the same ungrateful refusal.
Wow.
Right. And again, citing these numerous huquaq as the reason for his lack of generosity.
Huh. Okay. And so is the same consequence pronounced to him?
Exactly.
Okay.
So the angel tells this former bald man, if you are lying, may Allah return you to your previous state.
So this is really interesting because it's almost like highlighting this pattern of like forgetting past difficulties once you've kind of achieved a certain level of blessing or comfort in your life.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay. So we have the third man, right? We have the one who had been blind. And how does his encounter with the angel unfold?
So the angel approaches the man who had regained his sight, appearing as a blind and impoverished traveler. Yeah. And he makes the same request as he did to the other two, reminding him of his restored vision and asking for just a single sheep to help him on his journey.
Got it.
And again, invoking the name of the one who had restored his sight.
Okay. And so his response must have been different, right?
Yes, it was.
Given the outcome of the story.
Absolutely. It was a complete and utter contrast
Right.
to the previous two.
Okay.
So the man who was once blind responded with humility and deep gratitude.
Okay.
He immediately acknowledged that his sight and his wealth were blessings from God.
Right.
He welcomed the angel to take whatever he needed and leave whatever he wished.
Wow.
Saying that, he would not place any burden or difficulty on him for taking anything in the name of God.
Okay. So he really
He remembered.
yeah, he remembered his time of need and he recognized the true source of his current abundance.
Exactly. A really beautiful demonstration of true thankfulness.
Yeah. And it wasn't, he wasn't coming from this place of, entitlement.
No, not at all.
Right.
Not at all.
Which is what we saw with the other two.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So following these encounters, the angel reveals his true identity, right?
Yeah.
And what was the divine judgment that was passed on these three men?
So the angel tells the man who was once blind, keep your wealth, you have been tested, and Allah is pleased with you and is displeased with your two companions.
Okay.
So a very clear and decisive judgment based on, how each man responded to this test of gratitude.
Right. Okay. So, what are the ultimate consequences for the two who, were not grateful?
So the sermon explains the consequences were severe.
Okay.
For the two ungrateful men, their blessings were taken away,
Right.
and they were returned to their previous states of affliction and poverty.
Okay. So that's a pretty, obviously that signifies a huge loss
Significant loss.
in this life, but the sermon's also saying that there's a loss in the hereafter as well, right?
Right, exactly. And then, for the grateful man, his wealth remained.
Right.
And more importantly, he earned God's pleasure and mercy.
Right.
Right. So it really kind of highlights this idea that that gratitude is not just this, a nice to have or a good characteristic. It's actually something that's deeply connected to our well-being.
Yeah. Yeah. And really kind of brings home this point that this is a story.
Yes.
Right? It's a parable.
Mm-hmm.
That illustrates this, I guess, profound importance of gratitude.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the sermon goes on from there, right, to talk about, kind of some broader lessons on gratitude from, Islamic teachings.
Right. Exactly.
So what are some of the things that, he talks about in terms of, kind of what the Quran and other Islamic teachings have to say about gratitude?
So Sheikh Al-Kamali, he really emphasizes, the clear commands in the Quran to be grateful.
Okay.
Right. So he'll quote, verses like, and be grateful for the favor of Allah if it is him you worship.
Right. So gratitude's really kind of connected to the very act of worship.
Absolutely.
Right.
It's essential to it.
Okay.
Another verse he cites is, therefore remember me, I will remember you, and be grateful to me, and do not be ungrateful.
Okay, so that's interesting. So it's almost like this reciprocal relationship.
Right, exactly.
Between remembering God, being thankful, and then receiving that divine favor.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And so it seems like gratitude isn't just this nice feeling or this this kind of sentimental thing, right? It's really being presented here as this really fundamental principle.
Absolutely, it's at the core, right, of the relationship between a believer and God.
Right. Okay. And the sermon actually kind of goes on to say that God describes the best of His creation as being thankful, right?
That's right. Yeah. So the example of Prophet Abraham's mentioned, who's described as, being grateful for his favors, right? And then the descendants of Prophet Noah are also noted with the description, indeed, he was a grateful servant.
Right.
So it's really interesting because, these examples really kind of show us that gratitude is like a defining characteristic of the righteous.
Right. Okay. And then even, Prophet Muhammad himself, right?
Yeah.
Who obviously holds this, incredibly high,
status.
Right. Yeah. He also exemplified, immense gratitude, right?
Yes, that's right. So the sermon recounts how Prophet Muhammad, he would engage in these incredibly lengthy prayers,
Right.
Standing for so long that his feet would swell. And when he was asked, why are you exerting yourself so much, especially considering your, promised forgiveness?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
His reply was, should I not be a grateful servant?
Right. So that's...
And it's very powerful, right?
Yeah, that's a very powerful...
Because it really kind of shows us that even at that highest spiritual level,
Right.
gratitude remained absolutely paramount.
Yeah, like it wasn't something that you just kind of,
Yeah.
to achieve a certain level and then you're done.
Exactly.
It's like an ongoing practice.
Yes, absolutely. A continuous effort.
Right. Okay. And the sermon also kind of touches on something that I think, we all struggle with, which is this, the sheer enormity of the blessings that we receive.
Absolutely.
Right. Which makes ingratitude seem even more,
illogical, you would think.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So how does the sermon, kind of talk about that?
So to really drive home that point, the Quranic verse, and if you should count the favors of Allah, you could not enumerate them, is cited.
Yeah.
Right. And it's really to kind of emphasize this idea that the blessings surrounding us are they're countless.
Yeah.
And we often take so many of them for granted.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I think that's something that, it's almost overwhelming to consider, right?
Yeah.
Like
it's easier to focus on what you don't have
exactly
than on, the sheer abundance that you might already possess.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So, how does the sermon kind of break down the act of being grateful?
Okay.
Right. Like what are the different, kind of components or levels of true gratitude?
So the sermon explains that the very first and most essential level is recognizing and acknowledging that all blessings ultimately originate from God. Right. It's not just about our own, skills or intelligence or hard work.
Right.
So for instance, if someone, achieves success in their business, the sermon really kind of encourages them to see that not just as a result of their cleverness or their, their business acumen, but as a favor and a blessing from God.
Right.
Right. So it's kind of this shifting of the perspective from self-congratulation to acknowledging a greater source.
Yeah.
Right. So you're not the the sole architect of your success.
Right.
You're actually a recipient.
Yeah.
And I think that shift in perspective is really the bedrock of true gratitude, because it kind of prevents this sense of entitlement.
Right. Right. Okay. So we have that, that initial acknowledgement. What kind of follows from that?
So the sermon then emphasizes, this crucial step of actually using those blessings in a way that's pleasing to God.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So it kind of implies a sense of responsibility and stewardship. Right. It's not just about enjoying the gifts we receive. It's also about utilizing them for good.
Right.
And in accordance with ethical and moral principles.
Right. So it kind of raises this question of how are we actually using
Exactly.
what we've been given?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the sermon also kind of brings in this idea of, being good to parents.
Yes.
As kind of a part of expressing gratitude.
Yeah.
Which is, an interesting connection.
It is. It is. And so a Quranic verse, is referenced. It's Surah Al-Aqaf 46.15. And this verse actually includes a prayer for the ability to be grateful for God's blessings upon oneself and one's parents.
Okay.
So it kind of beautifully connects this gratitude that we owe to the divine with the respect and kindness we should show to those who brought us into this world.
Right, right. Okay. And then what about this link between gratitude and the continuation of blessings?
Right.
Right. Like does that actually help us retain what we have?
So the sermon highlights this fundamental principle that's derived from the Quran, that says that is because Allah would never change a favor which he had conferred upon a people until they change what is within themselves.
Okay.
Right. And so it's strongly suggesting that our internal state, including our attitude of gratitude or ingratitude, has a direct impact on whether blessings are sustained in our lives and within our communities.
Okay. So it's like a feedback loop.
Right, exactly.
Right? Gratitude fosters more blessings, while ingratitude, can actually lead to their withdrawal.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the sermon even mentions, that Prophet Muhammad sought divine help in being grateful.
Yes.
Which is, I think a really humbling,
It is.
thing to consider.
Absolutely. So the supplication that's mentioned is, O Allah, I ask you for steadfastness in faith, determination in righteousness, and I ask you for gratitude for your blessings.
Okay.
So, it really demonstrates that even for someone as spiritually elevated as Prophet Muhammad,
Right.
gratitude was seen as a continuous effort
Right.
that required divine assistance.
Yeah. So it's not just something that, you achieve and then you're done.
Right.
Right. It's this ongoing.
It's an ongoing practice.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
a one-time achievement.
Right. Okay. So it sounds like this sermon really kind of gives, a very comprehensive kind of understanding of gratitude, right? Starting with that, recognizing the source of all good things, and then, extending to how we actually live our lives.
Absolutely.
In response to those gifts. Okay. So is there anything else that you wanted to touch on in terms of, kind of the core message of the sermon?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the core message that Sheikh Al-Kamali, really wants to convey here is this constant need to remember God, to thank him sincerely, and to worship him in the proper way, right? And the story of these three men, it really serves as this vivid and unforgettable illustration of the profound rewards of gratitude, and then also the potentially severe consequences of ungratefulness.
Yeah. So it's not just about, you're not being a nice person if you're not grateful.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's actually
there are real implications.
Yeah.
Okay.
So as we kind of conclude this deep dive into Sheikh Al-Kamali's sermon, I think that the central takeaway is undeniably the profound importance of not just noticing the good things in our lives, both big and small, but actively recognizing,
acknowledging, and truly being grateful for them.
Yeah.
Right. And that story of the three men
absolutely
really just brings that message home in a way that's
hard to forget, right?
Yeah.
It's very impactful.
Yeah.
And I think it leaves us with a really important question to consider in our own lives.
Okay.
And that is, reflect on the blessings that you have.
Right.
Both the obvious ones, right, and the more subtle everyday graces.
Yeah.
How can you move beyond simply acknowledging them,
right,
to actively embodying gratitude,
right,
in your thoughts, in your words, in your actions,
right?
What real shifts might you see in your perspective and in your life if you truly cultivated a heart of thankfulness,
right,
as a consistent practice? So it's really this journey of ongoing reflection and a conscious choice that we can make each day.
Right. And I think, we saw that even in the example of Prophet Muhammad, right, that this was an ongoing, kind of practice for him as well.
It was a constant, a constant effort.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, this has been a really fascinating deep dive into this topic, and I hope it's given our listeners a lot to think about.
Absolutely.
In their own lives.
Yeah.
Okay. Until next time, everyone.
Take care.